These annual reports hide a story of a man whose obsession almost destroyed a multimedia empire, a story of a dying studio that can't hold its talent, and somehow a company that consistently failed its way to the very top. Blizzard is the parent company of World of Warcraft, Overwatch, StarCraft, and Diablo. They own several of the most beloved gaming franchises of all time. In a phenomenon similar to the Disney millennials, Blizzard also enjoys a ravenous fanbase of adults aged 25 to 40 who became superfans of the company back when they were children. That is why you also probably know that Blizzard has been mired in controversy after controversy for more than a decade. And while not all of these controversies have the same origin, for the most part, it is almost always because of the same idea. They release a new game product, the product is transparently designed to make money out of you, the player base perceives this as an unacceptable act of greed, they raise their pitchforks, and then they turn around and give them the $70 anyway. But the question I aim to answer is, how does Blizzard actually make money? Do they even need more money? What is their future looking like? Blizzard had a long and arduous march into what it is today. I could tell you Blizzard's story, but that video has been done 1,000 times. I will talk about the big picture here. They got funded in 1991 by 3 California frat boys. They got bought by a company that became a publicly traded company that then got bought by another bigger publicly traded company. Vivendi Games was the parent company where they eventually ended up in 1998. To make a long story short, Blizzard was considered a niche strategy game studio with a couple occasional hits that was part of the portfolio of a very big company that specialized in educational video games. They were kinda hot in the 90s, people thought they were gonna take over education. At the time, Blizzard was a solid, promising business, but not something you would call a 20x investment. That all changed in 2004 with the launch of World of Warcraft, the most successful MMORPG of all time, becoming an overnight success, hitting 7 million paid subscribers on its first year. It became arguably the most profitable video game of its time. You see, unlike most games back then where you bought the game for usually $60 and that's where the transaction ended, World of Warcraft had a $50 purchase price followed by a $15 a month subscription to play the game and a $40 price for each expansion, which came out roughly every 2 years. In its first year, World of Warcraft grossed an estimated $700 million. Not bad at all for a game that costed $63 million to make. Warcraft, the franchise that World of Warcraft came from, got 3 games and 6 expansions in 9 years, but as soon as World of Warcraft came out, development on the franchise stopped. We often talk about how revolutionary World of Warcraft was to the MMORPG genre, but we seldom talk about how deeply influential it was to the gaming industry as a business. The legacy of World of Warcraft can be felt to this day in every video game genre, as a game that popularized the live service business that almost every AAA game follows right now. Under the subscription model, Blizzard could extract out of you 3 times the money they would take from selling you the game, assuming you kept playing the game for a year, and MMOs are designed to keep you playing for as long as possible, so that was pretty much a given. To say Blizzard changed its approach after seeing all this money would have been an understatement. Why would you ever make another RTS to make $60 when you can get them into World of Warcraft and milk them for money for the rest of their life? Sadly, this was not all fun and games, as Blizzard became Vivendi Games' main cash cow and things quickly changed. Vivendi is a gigantic French mega corporation started by, I am not even kidding, Napoleon III. That is why it is so hard to see Blizzard's impact on the stock, because they own so many things. And Blizzard was just a tiny fraction of a gaming portfolio within a bigger portfolio. Vivendi was content, leaving them to run the company more or less like they saw fit. But as the money kept coming in, Blizzard all of a sudden gained all their attention. And Vivendi Games started trying to micromanage all the decisions they made. And that's something that the Blizzard management and their founding core deeply resented. And the reason I bring this up is because this Vivendi interference is what guided every financial and strategic decision they have made to this day. Whether they care to admit it or not, the number one goal for Blizzard at the time was to escape their French masters at any cost. And that ironically would take us to the Blizzard we are most familiar with, because in 2008, right at the peak of World of Warcraft's popularity, Blizzard would merge with Activision, the Call of Duty and Guitar Hero people, and became its own corporation separate from Vivendi Games. This was rather weird, but it was actually a very calculated move. 2008 was before Call of Duty Modern Warfare started moving more money per year than a third world country, and it was actually not doing so well at the time, so the merger was sold to Activision management as a way to secure their company. Something tied to a money printer like World of Warcraft could not fail. At the same time, Blizzard management was sold on a different idea. By merging Activision and Blizzard together, Vivendi only had 63% of the stock. They were not free from their grips yet, but this was a calculated Game of Thrones move in the making. Because in 2013, Activision was in the middle of Call of Duty Black Ops Mania. They were breaking in ungodly sums of profit every year, and they essentially came with Blizzard to tell Vivendi to screw them and their money, bought out their majority stake for $5.8 billion, and they, for once, became their own independent company. But breaking out of Vivendi was not free. As a part of the merger, the head of Activision would become the CEO of Activision Blizzard, a man by the name of Bobby Kotick. Kotick is an interesting character. He comes out of high school in the 80s and starts making software for the Apple II computer.
Are these reasonable estimates?
They're very reasonable.
So my numbers were reasonable?
Yes, they were.
You tell Howard that.
I think since I'm about 7, I've always been trying to find an excuse to get out of school. And when I came out here to Ann Arbor, and in a matter of months realized that here's a unique opportunity, I think we can make a lot of money, and I think I'm going to go into business. I called up my father and I said, Dad, you want to do me a favor? My father's an attorney. I said, can you get somebody to incorporate a company for me? And he basically said, cut the crap and start doing some schoolwork. And now I think their impression is a little bit different, although I'm still not sure that they understand what it is we do.
And then him and his partner Howard Marks developed Jane, a GUIs-based software package. This sounds like a bunch of nonsense, but imagine a fully functional Microsoft Office 12 years before Windows came out. And he would eventually run into Steve Jobs himself. This is him telling the story 30 years later.
And Steve heard about it, we gave him a demonstration of it, and he liked the idea of it and wanted us to make this software and the mouse for a new computer called the Apple II GS. So we started making it, and then Steve came to visit to see our software, and he got really upset with me because he found out I was still a college student, and he told me that I had to quit college. And I said I couldn't because I had committed to my parents that I would stay in college. And he said, I will rip your effing contract up with Apple Computer if you don't quit college tomorrow. And then he called me for a few days to make sure that I actually quit college.
From my research, it does seem like the story checks out, and it explains how it seemed like Kotick came out of nowhere with big amounts of capital. I mean to say that it is probable that if it weren't for Bobby and Mark's work, business software like Microsoft Office that we take for granted today would look very different. It is not public information how much money he himself made from this, but given he tried to acquire the entire company Commodore in 1987, we can assume that Steve Jobs paid him pretty well. He then becomes the CEO of Leisure Concepts, that is for kids by the way, and then leaves to buy a struggling video game company called Activision. Nowadays he's portrayed as this cartoonishly evil man that puts profit over morals, ready to squeeze good franchises into debt for every nickel and dime. And he is, do not get me wrong, he actually is, but so is every other CEO. As a matter of fact, it is illegal not to be that way. This is what we call fiduciary duty. Not acting in the best interest of your shareholders is quite literally a financial crime. It's not like he's any more greedy than the CEO of McDonald's, Monsanto, General Motors or Procter & Gamble, but the truth of the matter is that under his tenure, Blizzard Entertainment changed a lot. For example, Bobby Kotick realized that he could use Blizzard's prestige and die-hard fanbase as a cost-cutting mechanism. Some people are so passionate for World of Warcraft or Diablo that their lifelong dream it is to work at Blizzard. At the start of Blizzard, it was a company policy to hire only gamers, down from the lady at the reception counter all the way into upper management. It was done this way because Mike Morhaime wanted to nurture a culture of people that take pride in what they do, people that go product first, that go above and beyond to make the best game possible. But Bobby Kotick saw it at a very different way. If people dream about working at Blizzard at any cost, that means he could offer below market wages and people would still be willing to work for Blizzard, even if it meant they had to take significantly lower pay than their competitors. So one of Kotick's most infamous policy was to slowly shed out the old guard at Blizzard, all the old developers, the people that were there since the start, and he would replace all these people with hungry 20-something-year-olds with a very naive dream to make it in the gaming industry. The average salary for an Activision Blizzard employee is $39,142 a year. In Anaheim, California, not only one of the most expensive places in the US, but one of the most expensive places to live in the world. For a comparison, EA Games, a company that also has a reputation for being greedy and cartoonishly evil at times, pays an average salary of $105,000. And that might be a sample bias where they hire more high-level employees for whatever technical reason, but you can find consistently a gap in the wages of almost every position. By almost any measure, Blizzard is paying their employees a pittance. Because of this cost advantage, Blizzard can afford to be run very inefficiently and still make good profits every year for as long as they can keep finding enough people to work for 20 to 40% less than the market average. That is why to this day, even during major commercial failures, Blizzard has never had a losing year. But will this last forever? As Activision became a cash cow in the 2010s from its Call of Duty franchise and it controlled another cash cow in Blizzard, Bobby Kotick could afford to look at the very big picture in the future. Yes, Call of Duty and World of Warcraft were essentially printing money, yet the stock price was stuck at about $15 since the 2008 merger. As a matter of fact, Activision Blizzard's valuation only started rising quickly after 2013 when Bobby Kotick acquired complete control. Granted, part of what catapulted this stock price growth was the sale numbers from Diablo 3 the year before. Selling 20 million copies, it was one of the fastest selling video games in history. And it netted Blizzard profits that could rival World of Warcraft for its first year, as the game featured an auction house where players could sell their items that they found for real-world money, all the while Blizzard took a cut for every transaction. The real money auction house was not a simple $5 skin market, mind you. It was not a rare occurrence to see the best items in the game selling for over $1,000 each. However, this system caused a backlash, and more importantly, it created many legal liabilities to Blizzard, and they were forced to remove the real money auction house in 2014. With the main source of income gone, investment into Diablo 3 slowed down massively, only getting an expansion in 2014 as the auction house came to an end, and another one in 2017 that was poorly received because it didn't have enough content. It almost feels out of character for Activision Blizzard. Releasing expansions and sequels as fast as possible was Bobby Kotick's obvious choice. After all, the more you ship, the more you sell. However, by 2014, Bobby Kotick learned the hard way that there is a limit to how much you can exploit an intellectual property. The Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero sequels went from guaranteed blockbusters every year into serial underperformers in less than a decade. World of Warcraft will not pay the bills forever. And the numbers show. You can see a steady decline in Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. In the case of World of Warcraft, this bleeding of players briefly stopped in 2019 with the re-release of the original version of the game. But you can only get away with one of these re-releases one time. It was a great play, but it was not a solution that can be done again. And that's why for the last 10 years, Blizzard's and in turn Activision Blizzard's main strategic goal is to secure a post-World of Warcraft, post-Call of Duty future. Kotick tried many things during this time. The first idea was to make a new World of Warcraft. That game was called Project Titan. It was supposed to be an MMO in a sci-fi setting so ambitious it could dethrone WoW. But by 2014, it was deemed infeasible. Development was way behind schedule, there was some serious issues with the design, and even if those could have been solved, Blizzard accepted that they are in a catch-22. MMO players tend to stick to a single game. MMORPGs are designed to absorb as much of your time as possible, and even if you do have a lot of spare time, you are probably not going to spend it in two separate games. As World of Warcraft ruled over the majority of the MMO market, Blizzard relaunching a new MMO, no matter how many people it could bring, it would inevitably cannibalize on WoW. A moderate, nay, a big commercial success for Project Titan would not have been enough. New game goes up, old game goes down, and Blizzard ends up making more or less the same money as before, but now they are $300 million in the hole. A new MMO would have needed to be such a massive hit to compensate for all the players it would have taken away from World of Warcraft that nobody in their right mind would bet the farm on it. As a matter of fact, they would like it to be so big it either kills WoW or so small it fails immediately. Imagine a scenario where Project Titan and World of Warcraft end up sharing about the same size of a player base. They would make the same money as before, but now they gotta support two games. And that's the rule number one of business: never compete against yourself. Blizzard developers might hate Bobby Kotick for shutting down Project Titan to this day, but it is hard to argue against him, he was right. Making a new MMO was a lot more likely to kill Blizzard than to ever help it make another dollar. So Project Titan was eventually cancelled, but its assets and engine were reused to make the unexpected blockbuster Overwatch in 2016, a hero shooter that sold a whopping 50 million copies due to its, at the time, new and interesting gameplay and Pixar quality character design. But could Overwatch finally be the next big thing to take over after World of Warcraft dies? Well, hardly. Overwatch had mass appeal and a very profitable live service with the infamous loot boxes that they helped popularize. They were so profitable that the game grossed $1 billion in its first year alone. However, once again by 2018 their efforts were thwarted when several countries began to ban loot boxes outright or to make legislation that would subject it to the same regulations as normal gambling. Blizzard saw the writing on the wall, and likely Bobby Kotick himself was worried about attracting the attention of regulators into the company. So in 2022, with the release of Overwatch 2, the sequel, the all too profitable loot boxes were replaced by season passes. Blizzard was so committed to this battle pass, as they call it, that they even gave up entirely on trying to sell the game, as alongside it, Overwatch 2 became free to play. Keep in mind, the 2022 report is the last report they filed as a public company, and there was no mention of Battle Pass in the entire document. Usually when a company goes out of its way not to mention a key new product in a release year, that probably means it is underperforming, although sadly we will probably never know. Bobby understood from the decline of Call of Duty that the game industry was changing. No longer you could ship the same shooter game over and over just to sell as well as the previous year. There are way too many options now, and many of them are free. And pretty much all the modern shooters keep dropping updates and new content regularly to compete for people's attention. The genre is oversaturated, and Overwatch 2 underperformed in 2022, and that triggered the PvE game mode that they promised to be cancelled. Overwatch was a windfall, and a welcome one, that shot the numbers up into what otherwise would have been a pretty mediocre year, but it was not Blizzard's future, unless Overwatch could become a gateway to an entirely new type of business. And that's what became Bobby Kotick's most intoxicating and costly obsession. Games like League of Legends were making headlines year after year about how many live viewers they were pulling in the World Championship, how many stadiums they were filling up, how much money the pro players were making, and every LCS team paid Riot Games $10 million for a spot in the league. And Twitch and TV networks were paying them millions of dollars every year for the rights to exclusively broadcast the matches. Blizzard owns so many franchises, it is hard to tell a linear story of how this entire esports debacle went out, so I am gonna have to go back in time a little bit here. Bobby had his eyes on the esports market long before Overwatch. This is from Activision Blizzard's 2015 financial report, and I quote, "We believe that the esports spectator experience can be the equivalent of professional sports both in quality of viewing experience and in advertising, subscription, and pay-per-view revenues." The man had the audacity to put that he wanted to become the ESPN of esports in the company report. That's the amount of commitment we are talking about. League of Legends was the spin-off release of a Warcraft 3 mod called Defense of the Ancients. Defense of the Ancients was a custom map that basically pioneered the MOBA genre as we know it, and it eventually became a standalone game on its own right, Dota 2 by Valve. And although League of Legends defeated Dota 2 and other games like Heroes of Newerth to become the king of MOBAs, and it was clear by 2012 that they were not going anywhere, Bobby could not accept that one of their old games created this entire genre and that Blizzard could not see a dime from it. So against all the information in the market, Blizzard would try to make a move on League of Legends 5 years late to the party with Heroes of the Storm. Heroes of the Storm was a free-to-play MOBA game based on all the Blizzard intellectual properties, a multiverse game with all your favorite characters from Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, and God only knows what this is. Heroes of the Storm, as expected, failed to meet Blizzard's expectations. While it was by no means a commercial failure, as it held an estimated 30 million monthly active users at its launch, it was not the League of Legends killer that Bobby Kotick hoped it would be. On its 2016 report a year later, they said, talking about Heroes of the Storm, and I quote, "There is no guarantee these investments will result in established franchises." That is not something you say a year after release when you already have the market data unless it did not meet expectations. And as any self-preserving CEO, he couldn't just accept defeat, say that the MOBA market was too saturated and move on. So the Heroes Global Championship and Heroes of the Dorm Leagues were founded to build esports out of the game. Unsurprisingly, a game that couldn't capture the hearts and minds of the players also failed to capture the hearts and minds of the viewers, and Heroes Esports lasted a whopping 3 years and 4 seasons before it was quietly and promptly shut down in the Christmas season of 2018, in an effort to draw the least media attention possible. Overwatch came a year later in 2016. Surely a successful game could actually translate into a formidable esports empire. And the short answer is, well, it kind of did. The Overwatch League did actually get significant viewership. In 2018, the playoffs peaked at a 1.2 million viewers. Now, that number may sound like a lot because it is a lot of viewers for the internet, but let's get some perspective here. 2020 was widely regarded to be the NBA's worst year. Between COVID and several popular players retiring that very year, it remains the least viewed year since the 80s. And even then, the least watched NBA game of 2020 had 5.94 million viewers. When your best numbers are a fifth of what the worst numbers on the worst tier of the NBA can do, it is very hard to convince the market that you can somehow take ESPN on. And it's only been down from here. The peak viewership last year was actually 400,000 viewers, for example. Venture capital was flowing from every direction into esports back in 2016, and it is not hard to imagine that an industry that was on the up and up seduced Bobby Kotick with the idea that maybe, if he played his cards right, Overwatch as a competitive game could become a sport as popular as football or basketball. And so Bobby spent the years following Overwatch talking to several sports team owners, esports organizations, TV networks, and anybody that would listen, trying to get them to invest in his esports vision of the future. In 2023, esports was proven to be a speculative bubble just like many other tech bubbles before it, with high-profile investors like Madison Square Garden cutting their losses on an 8-figure buyout of Counterlogic Gaming just to sell it at a loss 5 years later. Today, esports is an industry single-handedly held together by Saudi oil money, and it is probably gonna get very ugly whenever the Crown Prince finds a better way to promote tourism into the country. Blizzard has managed to find enough money to keep the Overwatch League on life support, but as of late 2024 with the esports industry hanging on by a thread, it is unclear for how much longer this will be sustainable, especially given the weaker reception of Overwatch 2. Esports may have failed, but that didn't mean that Blizzard was in serious trouble. In 2016, Blizzard's revenue was $6.6 billion, with a net income of 15% after tax. By 2022, Blizzard hit $7.53 billion in revenue and a net income of 20% after tax. So Blizzard has been improving both its income and its net margins. They are not strapped for cash at all right now, but we are still talking about an average growth of 2.6% per year. This is not a rising tiger anymore. Blizzard understands it is stuck, and so they defaulted into the tried and true method for growing a tech giant. As a matter of fact, most of their growth is concentrated on this one area: mergers and acquisitions. In February 2016, Activision Blizzard bought King, the Candy Crush makers, for $5.9 billion. To this day, this acquisition remains one of the biggest come-ups in their history. To quote their 2021 report, in-game spending on Candy Crush has grown at a double-digit compound annual growth rate since the acquisition. King has made well over $1 billion in revenue every year and consistently showed growth ever since. The acquisition most likely paid for itself by early 2022. There may not be a great way to expand Warcraft, Diablo, Call of Duty or StarCraft anymore, but as long as subscription money keeps coming in, Call of Duty keeps selling, and people keep buying the Fortnite skins from Overwatch 2, there will be money to be made. If growth in their core franchises is not expected, there is really no cost in squeezing as much money from the players as possible, releasing unfinished games to save on production costs, and damaging consumer trust. All that money that they can extract from the players today can be used in acquiring more and more smaller companies, as long as a couple of them end up succeeding and becoming a double-digit grower like Candy Crush. That's gonna show very well on Wall Street. Activision Blizzard's strategy is not too different from modern Disney's. Exploit your old nostalgia-based audience for money today, so you can buy the games that capture the young audience tomorrow. Activision Blizzard realized that it had no future, but it had plenty of money to buy other companies' futures, the same way that tech giants like Facebook or Microsoft have been sustaining growth over the decades. And yes, that was an intentional segue into why none of this matters anymore. In October 13, 2023, Microsoft finally achieved their buyout of Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. Now, talk of this acquisition had been going around in the public as early as 2020, but it was unclear if Microsoft was going to be able to secure FTC approval and sort through European antitrust regulations to complete the buyout. But Activision Blizzard is no longer a publicly traded company. Blizzard is once again a small part of the portfolio of a gigantic corporation. And while obviously Microsoft would appreciate Blizzard making money, it is not their goal anymore. Xbox Gamepass is a service where you pay $15 a month to have access to a library of thousands of video games. It is essentially Netflix for gaming. Gamepass is expected to gross almost $8 billion in 2025 as it surpasses the 50 million subscriber mark. $8 billion may sound like a lot until you realize that it would take over 8 years to get the money to get Activision Blizzard alone. The only way to grow a streaming service like Netflix or Game Pass is to have all the hottest content, and video games are not cheap, with even moderately sized games costing $20 to $40 million, not including the marketing budget. Game Pass has only one big competitor in PS Plus for the PlayStation, and Phil Spencer's general idea is that if he can secure a monopoly for on-demand game subscriptions, it will eventually be much more profitable than selling games or consoles. And the way Microsoft plans to achieve this is to run Game Pass at an insurmountable loss and spend so much money acquiring games that no sane competitor would ever entertain the idea of taking them on. That is the Silicon Valley playbook, that you get users at any cost, then you lose all the money that you can, and you hope that if everybody else bleeds out before you, you are someday gonna be able to monetize and make absurd profits. Activision Blizzard is only one play in a multi-billion, multi-year plan that also includes buying out Bethesda and Warner Bros. Games. Most of Activision Blizzard's value to Microsoft was actually concentrated in the Call of Duty franchise from Activision, as one of the most popular console games in each generation and very close to the heart of the Xbox audience. Activision would warrant its own video, but why is Blizzard on the mix? Blizzard's stronghold has been traditionally on the PC market, which was considered a low priority for Game Pass. Microsoft had the option to spin Blizzard into a separate company, and yet chose to acquire it anyway along Activision, even when that made the legal process much harder, especially in Europe because of a previous deal with Ubisoft. So Microsoft must have some very ambitious plans for Blizzard, right? Now here's the thing about a service like Game Pass. You wanna have your blockbusters every year, of course, you wanna have your big releases that keep people signing up for Game Pass just to play them, but if somebody pays $15 for a new game, they start playing it at launch, and then they cancel Game Pass, all of a sudden Microsoft is on the hole for $45. The only way that Game Pass is ever gonna make money, the only way that Game Pass ever works, is if they have a customer retention strategy. And it seems that Blizzard is gonna fall in that category. In a strategy similar to Netflix, Microsoft wants to secure the equivalent of B-movies to drop into the months between major releases. These are middle budget games, or AA as they call them, and they had fallen out of favor in the industry for the same reason that B-movies have been falling out of favor in the industry before Netflix, and the reason is actually quite simple. It costs almost the same money to market a big game than to market a medium game. Spending more money promoting a game than making it is not cost effective. But if Game Pass needs to have a big launch every month to keep everybody subscribed, all of a sudden the math makes a lot more sense. Not to mention that they can always just tie in the releases of Game Pass into the marketing of Game Pass itself, that way also saving on marketing cost. Every commercial for Game Pass can now talk about the new games coming out this month, and that way they can promote the game within Game Pass. These filler games do not really have to blow your mind. As a matter of fact, you don't even need to play them, that's not even what they want. They just want you to feel like Game Pass is providing you with enough value that you should stay subscribed. The bigger the library, the better the value proposition is, whether you play the games or not. And as soon as the Microsoft acquisition was completed, the Xbox team started to restructure the company and cut the projects that they considered too big or too expensive for Game Pass. Blizzard had been working on this expensive survival game for close to 7 years by the time of the acquisition, and Microsoft shut down that project while also announcing mass layoffs. To quote the head of the Xbox studios at the time, Blizzard is ending development on its survival game project and will be shifting some of the people working on it to one of several promising new projects Blizzard has in the early stages of development. It turns out that you do not fire half a team if you plan to make even more ambitious video games than before. This is a decision in line with a Blizzard that wants to run leaner. Currently, Blizzard is rumored to be working on a spin-off shooter game based on StarCraft and some sort of cross-platform Warcraft spin-off. That is just the two projects we got to see from job postings so far, and that is because they had to build new teams for these projects. We do not exactly know what the existing teams are working on, but it is likely that it is more similar games on other franchises. There is also talk of mobile games in the works, as well as a lot of King employees getting transferred into Blizzard and promoted into project management, but the plan for Blizzard in particular is pretty clear. Continue the games that you already offer and try to run them as lean, as cost effective as possible to generate cash flow, and use that cash flow into making middle budget games every year, 2 or even 3 releases per year to keep the Game Pass library going. Since Blizzard is not a publicly traded company anymore, it is not concerned with profitability as much, and Microsoft will try to push as many games as possible, as cheaply as possible, but it might also be willing to foot the bill on the games that do not actually make a profit. Instead of optimizing for income, they are optimizing for output. But it is not like cheap game development was the reason that Microsoft wanted Blizzard, it is actually the franchises. Consumer trust might be deteriorated and the name StarCraft, the name Warcraft or Overwatch may not have the same impact that they once did, but they are still major brands and they still bring attention when you slap them onto something. And that is the real reason that Microsoft didn't want to let go of Blizzard on the acquisition. They could go to any company to produce AA games cheaply, but a Destiny ripoff or a mediocre single-player RPG is not gonna draw new customers to Game Pass, but a StarCraft shooter or a Warcraft RPG might. That is what they are betting on anyway. I am sure that the very long-term plan for Blizzard is not to have them only make Game Pass filler games, because Microsoft doesn't plan to lose money on Game Pass forever, but whether the endgame is actually chasing the old glory trying to make new hit franchises or not, it is pretty clear to me that Microsoft bought Blizzard for parts. I hate to bring this comparison to Disney again, but I think you should look at something like Disney when they bought Star Wars as a franchise, quality aside. I think that's what the future looks like. George Lucas was not willing to sign on too many spin-offs, too many Star Wars projects, because he was afraid that it would dilute the brand. But when Disney bought it, they intended to recover their investment as quickly as possible, and all of a sudden there was a flood of new Star Wars spin-offs and new merchandise and all sorts of new products. And I think Blizzard franchises are set for the exact same path. And the main example I can bring you is Overwatch. Microsoft values the long-term value of Overwatch so little as a brand that it is now relying on tie-ins with other intellectual properties like My Hero Academia to sell skins. Games like Fortnite also do this, and the community has been taken into calling this the Fortniteification of Overwatch for that reason, but Fortnite never had its own world building, its own characters or lore, so there was no real brand damage by doing this. But Microsoft is not confident that it can get much value out of Overwatch as a brand in the future, and that is why they are willing to destroy its last brand identity just to make that little extra profit today. I would love to say that it is out-of-touch executives that do not understand cultural value, but I am one to believe that Microsoft coldly calculated what they are gonna lose by running Overwatch into the ground, and they think that they are not losing much. And I am very worried that Overwatch is not the only franchise that they look at it that way. It is my honest opinion that Microsoft overpaid for Blizzard out of Activision Blizzard, and it would have become obvious by 2023 and the launch of Overwatch 2. Now there is a chance that Microsoft probably knew this, and they wanted to acquire it anyway at any cost, just to make sure nobody else got it. I mean, it's not like I got a seat in the board, but Activision Blizzard is now a mature and grown business that just will never reach the same levels of growth as it once had. That is not to mean that they are in trouble, and they are not even doomed to decline, but rather that after a company gets so big, they cannot grow fast anymore. Microsoft will probably extract the $69 billion worth of value that they spent one way or the other. King alone is very cash flow positive, and Activision is a remarkably well-run company. Player satisfaction be damned. But there is nothing that's stopping Microsoft from selling Blizzard for parts once again to somebody else in the future, and I think it is likely they will after their war chest for Game Pass runs out, especially if Game Pass does not end up being this money printer that they hope it will be.